Facebook and YouTube. So it is good to see y'all on Facebook and YouTube joining us. So let's turn to the book of Acts. Acts chapter 9. I'll start in Acts chapter 9. And I'm going to ask a question before we actually get to any reading. But let's take a look. Acts chapter 9. And we will start off with this question. All right, think about your Bible lessons when Saul the Pharisee, okay, so not Paul the Apostle, but when Saul the Pharisee was en route to Damascus, who was he wanting to persecute? Christians, right. He was wanting to persecute. All right, so when Saul was stopped on the road, what did Jesus ask him? Let's take a look at Acts chapter 9, verse 4. Cheryl had it for us, but we'll let Luke also tell us what happened. So the light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Did you notice what Jesus asked him? Why are you persecuting whom? Me. And we just said earlier that Saul the Pharisee was en route to Damascus to persecute Christians. Question, did Jesus make a mistake here? Probably not. That's usually a safe bet. Okay. So what does Jesus mean when he clearly sees Saul persecuting Christians, but he accuses Saul of persecuting him? What's the deal? Christians are his body. Would anybody agree with that? Okay.
It's kind of like persecuting a family. You persecute one, you got them all in your mouth.
Persecuting a family. Yeah. If you come at one of us, you come at all of us. Yeah, very much so. I think basically what we see here is this issue. What you do to the church, you do to Jesus himself. Let that soak in a little bit. What you do to the church, you do to Jesus himself. Would we all kind of agree with that? Okay. Why is that true? How does that work? Why does that make sense?
Matthew, there's the story Jesus tells about the great white throne of judgment. And he talks about, you did this to me, you did that to me, you did this other thing. He said, Lord, Lord, when did we do this? And he says, whenever you did this to one of the least of these, done it to me.
That's right. Jesus says very clearly, whenever you did X, Y, and Z to the least of these, you did this to me. Jesus connects himself and the least of these. That's true. Given how Jesus suffered, we identify with Jesus when we suffer similarly. Let's take a look at Philippians chapter 1. So we're going over to Philippians chapter 1. Paul makes this point. In the ancient world, especially the ancient Greek and Roman world, suffering was kind of a big deal. If somebody was suffering, the usual thought was, well, they probably deserved it. If you're having a bad time, if you can't seem to get out of the situation you're in, you probably deserved it. Disciples kind of thought something along those lines too when they saw the man born blind, and remember, and they asked, or the blind man, and they asked, who sinned, right? This man or his parents? The implication was, somebody probably deserves this. Given how Jesus suffered, Christians identify with Jesus. We connect with Jesus. We relate with Jesus when we suffer similarly. Philippians chapter 1, verse 27. We'll read to the end of the chapter. Paul says, "Let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and which is from God. For," verse 29 is kind of the kicker here, "for it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ, you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have." Look at verse 29 here. This is the kicker. This is the thing. It has been granted to you. Let me hear some of y'all's translations. The very first part of verse 29 there. What does it say in your Bibles? New King James says granted. The New International Version says granted. Anybody else got anything? Given to you. Okay. Yeah. The very first part of Philippians 1, verse 29. I'm curious. A lot of people's translations are saying granted or given. Given. Okay. Yeah. The New Revised Standard has an interesting little twist on this. It says, "For he has graciously granted to you." I think that kind of captures the Greek word behind this. There are other words in Greek that you can use to give somebody something. There are other more generic words. Paul uses a special term here that really means something like, well, graciously given. The word here is related to the word normally translated grace. It almost is a gift that you have been gifted the opportunity to suffer with Jesus. And that is a strange thing to think about. But we see this connection here of Jesus and his body, the church. And as Jesus suffered, the church will suffer. As Jesus is glorified, the church will be glorified. What happens to one happens to the other, by and large. All right, so we talked about the church as a body, right? We've mentioned that. What are some other ways the New Testament describes Jesus's relationship with the church? The bride and the bridegroom. Yeah. Anything else? Does the word Lord ring a bell? We heard that one before. Okay. Master, right? Savior, Redeemer. Okay. Yeah, we know some of these. But the bride and the bridegroom, now that's an interesting one. Paul compares the relationship of Jesus and the church to a healthy marriage, at least ideally, right? Ideally, it should be a healthy marriage. A marriage, by way of implication of what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 5, we'll be there in just a moment. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1, Paul talks about this idea of mutually submitting to each other. And then he goes on to specify wives and then husbands and so on. Now, the analogy of Jesus and the church being a marriage, that breaks down just a little bit, because Paul isn't implying that Jesus and the church mutually submit to each other, right? Jesus doesn't submit himself to the church. But the mutual love and honor and loyalty. Another way of saying loyalty is fidelity. Another way of saying fidelity is faithfulness. All of those things are absolutely analogous to this relationship that Jesus has with the church So now let's turn to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25. Pay attention to how Paul describes the togetherness, the closeness in these verses, the closeness that Jesus has with the church. So Ephesians chapter 5, starting in verse 25. Paul says, husbands, get off the couch. No, I'm sorry. That might be the message. Yeah. Paul says, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Husbands, is that an easy task? No. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, in order to make her holy by cleansing her with the washing of water by the word, so as to present the church to himself in splendor, without a spot or wrinkle or anything of the kind, yes, so that she may be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as they do their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hates his own body, but he nourishes and tenderly cares for it, just as Christ does for the church, because we are members of his what? Body. And then Paul quotes something here in verse 31. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a great mystery, and I am applying it to Christ and the church. He goes on with the rest of that. All right. Looking at how Paul describes the degree of togetherness, the degree of closeness in these verses, what does Paul say? How does he describe this? What's this? It is a relationship of husband and wife. How exactly, what exactly does Paul say that relationship looks like? Love and respect, they're very close. Dedication, camaraderie. How many fleshes are involved here? That's where I'm driving at. They get married and the two become what? One flesh. One flesh. What Old Testament passage does Paul cite in these verses? Bonus points if you can get it without looking at your Bible's cross-references or something. Cheryl's already looked at it. Cheryl and Linda are cheating, but it's okay. If cheating means looking ahead in the Bible or behind in the Bible. Genesis chapter 2. Let's dart over to Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2. While you're turning there, I'm going to mention this too. Over the years in my teaching and preaching, I find myself consistently being drawn back to the first 2 chapters of Genesis. There is so much good stuff there that I have missed for years and years. And the more that I've started to dig into that, especially by helpful things, I don't know how many of y'all have heard of the website called Bible Project. Let me highly recommend. They've got a YouTube channel. So if you go to youtube.com and type in Bible Project, they have a little channel. You can go there. They have tons of great videos that break down books of the Bible with all kinds of neat animations and things. They have great resources for understanding different topics in the Bible. And so I highly recommend those guys. I've watched a lot of their stuff. There might be an issue here and there where I could nitpick something, but by and large, I think they represent really good historical, biblically orthodox perspective on things. And the more I've dug into some of their stuff, the more I found that I appreciate the kinds of things that we're going to read right now. Genesis chapter 2, verses 23 through 24. Then the man said, This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one was taken. Period, end quote. And then, before we even have fathers and mothers in creation, we get a little insertion into the text, almost like a footnote. Or maybe somebody else is looking backwards and saying, there's something really important here. Therefore, a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. All right. A little bit of context here. These are all familiar verses, right? If you've ever been married or been to a wedding, chances are you might have heard these, or if you've ever read the Bible. So anyway, all right, these verses here, starting in around Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, God allowed Adam to name the animals. God allowed Adam to name the animals. And that, by giving him the ability or the authority to name these animals, it really shows Adam's authority over creation, kind of reaffirming Genesis chapter 1, verses 29 through 31. When it says, let man have dominion over the fish in the sea and the birds in the air and everything else. But as Adam goes through and he starts naming all these animals, he finds that there is no suitable corresponding helper. There's no suitable corresponding other available for Adam. Admittedly, dogs were probably a very distant second, okay? But there was not another person comparable to him in some other way. So again, you know the story. Eve is made. And in Hebrew, this is really neat. The Hebrew word for man in the sense of male is also the same word for husband. And that Hebrew word is ish. Ish. It almost seems, it's kind of like you find a dead spider in your house. Ish. Yeah. All right. Similar to that. Okay. Ish. The Hebrew word for woman in the sense of female, but also means wife, is isha. Isha. And so you have ish and isha. And the sense there is that the woman was drawn out of man. Now, it just so happens that it kind of works in English too, where you have man and woman. And y'all have heard why Adam called Eve woman, right? Took one look at her and said, whoa, man. Okay. Just making sure you're paying attention. Yeah. Just making sure y'all are paying attention. All right, according to Genesis 2, how was Eve formed? She's formed by Adam's rib. It's a beautiful image that Adam and Eve, separated from his rib, are reunited in marriage. They become one flesh again. Adam sort of regains not just that rib, but a whole other person reunited with him. And so whatever you do to the church, you do to Jesus, because the church is united with Jesus, much like how a wife and husband are united in marriage. They're spiritually one flesh. Not literally one flesh, right? But spiritually one flesh. Now let me ask this. Is something less real just because it's spiritual? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. All right, think about healthy marriages. What would you say, again, healthy marriages? What would you say about a couple who claim to love each other, but routinely refuse to be together? What'd you say? Something's rotten in Denmark. Yeah. That's something weird. Some kind of dysfunctional. Something not especially healthy. Okay. How do you feel connected to a spouse or a close friend? What kinds of things make someone connected to a spouse or a close friend?
Spending time together.
Spending time together? Yeah.
Interest,
Common interest? Yeah.
trust.
Trust? Yeah. Which usually takes time to develop. Yeah. Yep. Trust? Anything else? We're just kind of spitballing here. Yeah. Shared activities and experiences. Time to talk. Yeah.
I was thinking the way you look at each other, it's different than you look at other people.
Very true. Yeah. Very true. I give only my dumbest stares to Linnea because she can handle them. Because she can handle them. What do you do that makes you feel most connected or closest to God? What was that, Joe? Pray. Absolutely. Praying is kind of like talking, in a sense. And that might mean that maybe there need to be equal times or maybe more times of prayer where you're listening. Kind of tough to do today's world.
I think when we read the scripture is a form of listening as well.
Very true. Reading scripture is a form of listening to God.
You learn a lot about him.
Very much so. And yeah, part of this will seem redundant. What was that guy's name? Oh, the famous baseball player. What was his name?
Yogi Berra.
Yeah, there we go. Yogi Bear. You can yeah. You can you can learn a lot by somebody if you get to know them. Yeah. Yeah. No, but it feels like something he would say. Yeah, it's in the spirit of Yogi Berra. Yeah. Singing, right? This singing. How many of you when they sing your favorite songs on Sunday mornings? And there was one the Great Redeemer the other day we sang. He has everything to I was smiling so big because it's so bouncy and fun and uplifting, and I needed that. And then the basses come in. He has everything. It's almost like we're sailing the seven seas, or something. Yeah. But prayer? No, absolutely. Yeah. And then I come from a musical family, and so I'm not the kind of guy that's going to get up there and do one of these, but man, I want to conduct because I want to get into it. And so you might see me like if we're really singing one of my favorites, you might take a peek over at me. If I'm not trying to get Samuel to not run down the aisle, I might start conducting a little bit. Prayer, obviously, yeah. Joe mentioned prayer earlier. There are a few instances in the Gospel of Luke where Luke specifically mentions how Jesus would go and spend the night in prayer. The other Gospels mention Jesus pray, but Luke really indicates that Jesus had a habit of going off by himself for those kinds of times. Bible study? Anybody? Bible study? Yeah, I mentioned that. What about?
What you're saying is it's not just being with that person, it's being only with that person. So Jesus didn't just pray to God while he was with a group of people. He went out and he was with God alone.
Yeah. And that was the very next thing I thought of that I wrote down here in my notes was after Bible study was time alone maybe in a beautiful place. And you can really see God at work in the beauty of creation. The other night, I walked past our guest room, and our guest room faces west, and it's upstairs. And I noticed as the sun was setting, you could see the colors pretty well. And what I've explained this to the boys before, but I wanted to show them. So I said, Pete, Samuel, come in here. Coming on into me, mom, and D-Dad's room. So they hopped up on the bed, and we looked at it and said, okay, guys, what colors do you see? And they listed off the colors of the rainbow. I said, but what's different about a normal rainbow than what you see here? And Pete said, oh, these colors are upside down. Because if you notice the sunset, red, orange, yellow, blue, green. But on a rainbow, it's red, orange, yellow, blue, green, and so on. And so we just kind of sat there and said, hadn't God made a beautiful world? And I want that kind of thinking to be normal to them. I want them to know, like even non-religious people, I suspect they feel some sense of gratitude towards something, or they feel some sense of awe, but they don't know exactly where to direct that when they see something in nature it's extraordinarily beautiful. And I want these guys to know it's like we can direct that somewhere. We can point that to God. All right, so singing, right? Bible study, time alone in a beautiful place, time with Christian friends, right? Yeah, I think that's really useful. What about going to church? Is that fair? Is that?
Yeah, I've heard called by someone a long time ago, it's like a family reunion. And so
Church is like a family reunion, yeah.
it's nice to have a family reunion.
I like that. Yeah, I can see that. Why do we go to church?
Primarily to worship.
To worship? Okay. Anybody else?
You've been doing it since you were a kid.
You've been doing it. We're expected to. Yeah.
It becomes a habit.
A good habit, a holy habit. Yeah. You've heard a lot about bad habits. You can develop holy habits too. Ones that are a little bit more substantial than saying bless you after somebody sneezes. There's not anything wrong with that, but create a holy habit with some more oomph than that.
It's going to be to get renewed.
To get renewed, yeah. Very much so. Yeah.
Fellowship with the saints.
Fellowshipping with one another, yeah.
Fellowship with the saints.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Building one another up.
Mm-hmm.
Building up others, being built up by them.
Yep.
Hopefully.
That's it. Ideally.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, we're talking ideally here. We're expected to. It's good for us, right? I would hope, at least, that it's good for us. There's the example of the early church. I mean, they were constantly gathered together. Remember a couple of Sundays ago, I preached where I rolled quickly through the first 6 chapters of Acts and showed, hey, the believers were gathered together. They were praying together. They were together, et cetera, et cetera.
I don't think they stayed longer together, like the first day of the week. You
They
know?
might not have had to go rush out and watch a football game.
No. In the Philippines, it's like nobody really looked at their watch when I was growing up.
Mhm.
Like, you will have like, but they don't usually start on time either. So they listen for a good while.
Yeah.
So, like, when can I know what's happening in each other's lives? And
Yeah.
and then there's worship. And then there's usually like some gathering over a meal.
Mm.
And then sometimes they stay over and sing. And
Yeah.
nobody's in a hurry.
I want to do church like that. Yeah, I could do
They
that.
didn't seem to be in a hurry when we were in Costa Rica.
No, they sure weren't.
Mm.
They
Yeah.
had to beat the Baptist to Luby's.
I wonder if I can edit that out, Joe. Yeah, there was a. Well, what's that?
Well, because the whole, all of us
Mhm.
are greater than just one of us.
Very true.
So, we can do more of God's work as a whole,
Absolutely.
as a unit. And then what is that, synergy? And,
Yeah.
and than just one of us.
Very true. Joe mentioned, for the sake of those who are kind enough to join us online, okay, so
Which is another reason.
we're Joe was just mentioning the benefits of the church where people can help you out, and here we are seeing it played out in the comments. Sandy, thanks for working on that. Let me ask this question. This is not intended to be a mean question, but it's an honest question. To be a faithful Christian, is church attendance required? Part of the requirement? Sure.
To, like, stay with the fellowship, what do you call it?
Forsaking the fellowship.
Yes, forsaking the assembly.
Yeah.
Not the forsaking assembly.
Well, it's also contradictory to being part of the body. The old poem about no man is an island.
Mhm.
It's really hard to edify and to be edified if you're just sitting in your room by yourself.
Yeah.
And that was why I think it was so important to have Zoom classes and Zoom meetings and stuff all during the pandemic, because it was really sort of, very isolating and just sort of like, blah.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't get with.
But you have shut-ins, I mean,
Right.
they can't.
Right.
Monty sat over there at that horrible place he lived in, and I'd go over there and say, how's it going? Good. How's it going? Awful. And
Yeah.
he says, I'm really sick of cartoons.
Yeah. I get that with a question like this, there's a real risk of alienating someone or shaming them for not doing something that they physically cannot do. Okay. So before we go any further, I want to make it absolutely clear what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. Because, unfortunately, maybe like you, I have been egregiously misquoted and misunderstood before Christians who claim they were friends and subsequently accused me of saying terrible things I never said. So, Joe's right to bring up shut-ins. If your health prohibits you from coming to church, I get it. I understand. It is a real issue. And we all know it affects people in virtually every congregation. And so if it's not possible, right, for you to come, or you run extraordinary risk to your health, or maybe the health of the people around you, we get it. We get it. I think there's grace in that. That being said, I believe for those who can make it, I believe it is fair to expect church attendance. Now, we asked the question earlier, why do we go to church? Let me ask this question, which is related. Is church attendance important? We would all say yes. All right, you know what I'm going to ask now. Why? Because all those things that we just mentioned earlier. Yeah.
A, B, C, D.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah. Wait, we don't have choirs. Just for the record, we don't have choirs.
Yeah. Point taken.
They're-
Point taken. We get it. It is the church is Jesus's body. We just said that earlier.
And I think too, when you start slacking off, then you tend to really slide down. And then like
Yeah.
you feel like, okay, it's so nice if I just sit there on Sunday, well, that was nice. I'm gonna do it again.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's easy. It's easy to create unholy habits. We talked about holy habits earlier. Yeah.
That's one of the big problems, I think, that has been the result of COVID,
Mhm.
is that a lot of churches quit meeting as much as they used to. And over 2 years of getting into that habit, it's
Yeah.
kind of hard to break that habit,
Yeah.
to get back in the habit of attending church services.
It is hard to get back into that habit. And one of the double-edged swords of technology is for those who cannot make it because of extraordinary risk to themselves or people around them, et cetera. For those who cannot make it, it is great that they can see us and watch us and follow along with the life of the congregation, from afar. It is also unfortunate that for those who want an extra excuse not to be here, or any church that they were a member of, those avenues have unintentionally enabled that kind of. Yes,
I
ma'am.
have a question.
Please.
It's not necessarily like related to what you're discussing, it's about church. Since we're saying, my understanding of the church is a group of, it's a body of believers, right? And the assembly is the church, it's not the building.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, my question would be, like say in a broadcast, like you're broadcasting, and there's a lot of us, like say 20 of us listening to this broadcast, like a Bible study, would you, and we're like separate, we're just watching over in the phone. Are we like gathered together as a church? I know it's a modern technology.
Yeah.
And it's not the usual church gathering, or there's not, like say individual 20 people in their phone, 20 different parts of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think part of.
Let me, for the sake of the recording, let me repeat that question just for everybody who's listening on. Easterbell asked if we are, if we're doing essentially what we're doing now, where we're kind of broadcasting and everybody is sort of individually watching, or like what we had been doing on Sundays for a while, where I had my Zoom Bible class where individually, a handful of folks were together. Does that count as being the gathered church? So that was the question. Randall had a comment along those lines.
Well, I was about to say now that you should just ask the people that are on the other end of the video what they think about it. But I've been there, right? Back before we started having this, we participated in various Bible classes through Zoom or various other methods. And so we were interacting because we were able to comment, and that comment was heard by the other people or read by the other people as well as the teacher. So there is some fellowship involved in that.
Right. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't see right now the comments of the people that are watching this on YouTube or Facebook. So
There are not a lot of comments.
A little bit less community there. And then some people might be watching or listening, but they never say anything. So I don't have any interaction with them. But that's not any different than going to church, because there's people who say, "Oh, that's not."
Sure. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know them.
Yes.
And they don't talk to me. I interact with the people that are close by, and we're always encouraged to go talk to somebody that you don't usually talk to. But there's only so much time.
Sure.
at the end of
Right.
the day.
Well, if you're as clock focused as some of us have become accustomed to, if you do church a little bit more along the lines of what Easterbell described, then we might have some more time. Yeah, I think that we could probably land on sort of a middle of the road answer, where, like what Randall was saying, it's perfectly possible to sit in the same row as somebody and not talk to them. Well, have you fulfilled your Christian duty to be the body of Christ if you come and just take your communion and bail? Probably not. But if you're, say, in a venue like this, or like our Zoom class that we had, where we're interacting and talking, and I'm sharing some of the chat as it's relevant, as we've done for the last few weeks, then I would say probably in a sense that is the body gathered together, albeit it might be kind of strange. I mean, goodness, this example that we've just seen play out here on Facebook that I mentioned to y'all a moment ago, the body is reaching out to help the body. And we have that happening right now. And so probably it's probably not either or. It's probably, it can go well or poorly, whether you're together online, or it can go well or poorly, whether you're together in the building. Joe, yeah. It can be, yeah.
I mean, we are on this spiritual road.
Yeah.
And we're to grow spiritually. Right?
That's the hope, at least.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
And so it's like if you go to the gym, and you go to the gym, you put on your gym clothes, but you don't do any exercises, and then you take off your gym clothes and you go home.
You're just
had a good time.
You're just there in the gym.
You walk around, you feel better about yourself.
Right.
But you don't really grow.
Yeah.
And I think that whatever circumstances can impede you through no fault of your own, you still don't grow as much.
Yeah,
So you
understood.
can't show
I think.
up and hold their hands with everybody and all of that. You just don't grow as much. I mean, you may grow, you can do all kinds of Bible studies and everything on your own, but there are things that we do that are good for us and help us grow.
Very much so.
And so if you don't do those things, if you come in and get your Lord's Supper and then, be put out of the door without, saying anything to anybody.
Yep.
Well, you may be saved, but you just don't grow and you don't experience the full wonderfulness.
Yeah.
There's such a word. The wonderfulness of salvation, of
Yeah.
being saved and the love of Christ.
It's like
The
Randall,
relationship.
like Randall said, there's only so much time.
Sure,
So
yeah.
we're talking to Ron and Linda, and pretty soon Randall and Cheryl are gone, and so much less the other people.
And then somebody's turning the lights on.
Yeah. Joe's comment there about going to the gym and just being at the gym, but not being involved in the life of the gym or in the activities of the gym kind of reminds me of my question that I asked earlier. What would you say about a couple who claim to love each other, but routinely refuse to be together, meaning they routinely refuse to do the things that would demonstrate to themselves and the world that they love each other? That is the problem.
And would provide the benefit of having two people
Yeah.
love one another.
Very much so.
You're not really necessarily showing the world that you love one another. It's you're getting the benefit of living with somebody who you love.
Mhm. Yep.
Also,
I've done the other one.
I've
for a
been
while.
thinking about some of the scriptures that are the one another scriptures. And if you are not participating in the body, then you are losing out on all the one another scriptures.
Yeah.
I was just looking at Romans 12 and it's talking about, be joyful in hope, patient affliction, faithful in prayer, share with God's people who are in need, practice hospitality. And if you're
Romans
not
12,
with
yeah.
people, you can't practice hospitality or share with those who are in need. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are involved with one another's that you miss out on.
Yeah.
I'll give you a great example. So the Labels and always hosted the Southside group. Well, they're going to move, so they said, well, we're not going to do this anymore. So, is there anybody that wants to do that? And the crickets are chirping online, right? And
Mhm.
so then Jody and I talked to, well, okay, we'll do it, and it's just been. I mean, we have gotten a lot more out of it than anybody there.
Yeah.
It's just a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
It's a blessing.
It's a blessing. It's such a blessing. It's so much fun.
Similar experience with our Monday Night Football life group that we had. Justin started that right around the beginning of football season in the fall. And when he told me about that, I don't really follow football very much. I don't have time to. I tend to work on Sundays. And so I don't have a lot of time to do that. Right. Yeah. And so, yeah. And so when he told me about that, it's like, okay, great. Y'all have fun with that. And then I started thinking, I bet I'm going to get to know some guys there that otherwise I wouldn't run into.
Yeah.
And so I started going, and man, what a treat. What a treat. It was a men's group and the football game was on, but that was not the point. We'd watch, and if there was a big play, we'd listen and we'd talk about it, but the game was on, but we were catching up with each other. I was learning about, so-and-so's mom wasn't doing well, or, hey, how's your kids doing? They were having this issue at school, everything going all right. Hey, you got a little one on the way. Wow, that's awesome, man. Are you nervous? Do you need anything? We were actually growing, and then the TV would go off at halftime, and we would have a devotional until we ended. We weren't racing to get back on to the kickoff at the third quarter. The devotional went until we ended. And I felt like I got to know some of the younger guys too, because they would show up. Some of the guys who are in middle school and high school. And that was a great opportunity, a time to be together with the body. Turn to 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Everybody's favorite book, right? The Thessalonians. I don't know anybody who feels like they regularly quote from the Thessalonians. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 7. Paul is describing his work with churches as an apostle. But the main takeaway that I want us to see here is how Paul describes the church and its spiritual benefit for those who are there in the life of the body. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 7, Paul says,
Verse 7, chapter 7.
oh, good luck. Yeah, it's a textual variant. Look at about halfway through that verse. He says, but we were gentle among you, like a nurse tenderly caring for her own children. So deeply do we care for you that we are determined to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become so very dear to us. This is fascinating, coming from a guy who was not married and had no kids. But he says that the togetherness of the church, it is spiritually nourishing to the same degree that a nursing mother nourishes and literally gives life to a child. That's what the church is like. Again, the analogy breaks down at different points. Okay, whatever. That's not, it's not the point to nitpick. It's that nourishing. Hebrews, you don't have to turn there, but earlier we mentioned Hebrews 10 and the idea of forsaking the assembly. That word forsaking, we got to be really careful about that word. I don't think it means skipping Wednesday Bible study. I think forsaking the assembly means you have abandoned the body. And I think that's what the author of Hebrews is really driving at. Yes, we want people to come and be part of the life of the church. Yes, we have good things to offer. Obviously, Sunday mornings, Wednesday nights, Sunday evening group that meets over here, we've got good things to offer. But the idea of forsaking there is not just, oh, you missed one, or that's, you don't come to that one. It's you have abandoned the body. So why do some people who claim to be Christians choose not to attend church?
Well, some have had bad experiences.
Bad experiences?
Or got upset with someone and just.
Hurt feelings? Yeah. Would you believe that some people who, again, claim to be Christians don't think it's necessary to go to church? Yeah, it is. Yes, ma'am.
One of the most memorable examples I ever heard a preacher preach was using the example of going to visit a member who had decided it wasn't necessary for them to attend church to be a Christian, and talked about the fact that the fire in the fireplace was burning, and the preacher
Took the log out.
moved the coal off.
Yeah.
Away from the under of the fire, and didn't really say anything, but that coal lost its breath, its fire, and died.
Yeah.
And I thought that was
Yeah.
probably the best illustration I've ever heard.
Yeah, the story is, again, for those who are listening, the story is a preacher went to visit someone who decided that they didn't need to come to church. And so the preacher took the log off the fire and set it aside, and it gradually died down. And the version I've heard of that story is that through the course of the conversation, at one point, the preacher put the log back in, and then it reignited. And the point was clear. You could be alive and thriving in the Lord if you would just come back to the source. Yeah. Unfortunately, it is.
I've heard people make that.
Yes, sir.
That you mentioned a while ago.
Yeah.
Now, we're just, they always going to church, they're kind of sarcastically speaking. They're Christians, but they don't go to church.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's all too common to doubt the importance of regular meeting. But listen to this quote. This is a longer quote, but I think it's got some real punch to it. Listening to the whispers of Western culture, you might get the impression that God can essentially be found everywhere but church. In the woods, in activism, or in silence. And when you have 2 kids, that one's pretty tempting. It's as though we believe abandoning the church is our best way of loving God. Perhaps, again, this is the author, perhaps this reaction is justified in light of past generations who overemphasized church going as the sole means of encountering the living God, but ignoring the historical and biblical witness regarding the importance of being among God's people is itself entirely unjustifiable. There's literally no expression of covenant faith in the Bible, in Israel or the church, that disconnects faith formation from the community of God's people. Man, that stings. Loving God, but hating his people has no historical precedent. Part of loving God is loving the church and being present with her.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
The immense proliferation of the Zoom meetings is only accelerating that attitude.
It can if we're not careful, yeah.
It is. In the virtual reality stuff, I don't need to talk to Joe or be close to Joe. I could be 1,000 miles away in a motel room with him. But you
Yeah.
lose a continuity. When you do that, a lot of companies are worried that they're losing continuity and they're losing their culture.
Yeah. It's all too easy to let the good things go when it's just,
Because it's more than just ABC, XYZ,
yeah.
1 + 1 = 2. It's like it's a community.
Yeah.
And there's another part of that, is that you learn to love people
Yeah.
that on occasion are not very lovable, maybe not like you, not the same background or, and I think that is also one of the things that makes people grow.
Yeah.
Is by learning and that's what Corinthians is all about.
Mhm.
Learning how to get along.
Learning how to deal with people. Yeah. A study on 1 Corinthians. Yeah.
And so I think that is important as an exercise to learn to love people that are different and not altogether lovable.
Yeah.
You have to get to know someone to love them.
To love them genuinely, yeah, you can, yeah.
You know them better and you know their cares and you share that, what's going on in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, I'll ask this. We're right near the end of our time, and I've got just 2 more points. Was it good for man to be alone in the Garden of Eden? No. If you look at creation, this again goes back to what I was saying earlier. I've learned a lot. You can learn a lot about God just from Genesis 1 and 2. If you look at the story of creation, everything is pronounced good except one thing, and it's a solitary human being. It makes sense that we as humans are created for community, since we are created in God's image and God himself exists in perfect, eternal community of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. If we're created in God's image, then it just makes sense that we have this natural, deep yearning to know others and to be known and to be loved by the people who know us.
That's very interesting that during creation, God created male and female animals. And then he just created one
Just one man.
man. And then he noticed, observed that he was lonely.
Yeah.
Animals didn't feel lonely. They had their own.
I wonder if Adam needed that lesson. I doubt God needed that lesson. Last thing is this. So perhaps one way we can overcome doubt whatever the doubts or fears we have that might push us away from God. One way we can overcome doubt is to be surrounded by the community that God created for us. Perhaps by being so closely knit together where the people around us, they know us, and despite knowing us, they still love us. That's the kicker, right? Linnea is absolutely amazing because she knows me and sticks around.
And then she strikes.
But she knows us.
That's how she earns royal points.
Linnea, I hope you're able to catch this. You're getting some big brownie points down here. But perhaps by being so closely knit together, we will find the spaces, the times to ask our tough questions. And perhaps we will encounter the answers to those tough questions coming from the brothers and sisters around us. So one way to overcome doubt, please, this has happened too much, and I've not been in ministry for as long as Mark, but I've seen it happen too many times where when somebody begins to have doubts or troubles or concerns, they withdraw from the community, the very community that can surround them and support them and help them walk through this. Maybe going to church is more important than we realized. Guys, I really appreciate y'all joining us tonight. And guys, thanks for being online. And we'll close in a word of prayer here in